Hi, everybody. Today we are finally going to talk about metaphors, about all this talk in the last lecture about how games represent and make meaning and all of that. Today we will dive more into the theory and a structural, systematic approach on how we can represent abstract concepts through metaphors. So I call this the art of nailing pudding to the wall. Yeah, how do people understand and make sense of the human experience? That's one part of this. And then how can we use structural metaphors to express that? To make games about the human experience. Remember from the very beginning of this course, where I talked a little bit about Clint Hawking and also shared his GDC rant with you from 2008. Where he asked, why don't we have the courage to make games that challenge people? Why isn't Call of Duty actually about duty, or Medal of Honor actually about honor, and all of that? So he had all of these provocative questions. How can we design games that challenge us deeply, that teach us something about the human experience? And he said, it's code, dude, we can do anything, and it's not more difficult to model the mechanics of trust than it is to model the mechanics of rope. And I would disagree with this a little bit, because rope, we know what it is. Trust is much more difficult to grasp. There are many ways to go about making games that challenge us and that communicate the human experience to us. And there is definitely more than one future of games, and deep games too. But I suggest that metaphors are one such possible way to go, and a very rich and rewarding one as well. I will come back to this definition, but just so we know what we're talking about, the essence of metaphor is understanding and experiencing one kind of thing in terms of another. This definition is taken from George Lakoff and Mark Johnson's book, Body and the Mind. And Metaphors We Live By. Metaphors We Live By. They also wrote the book about body and the mind and philosophy in the flesh. So it's all about the physical embodied grounding of our experience, which is the realm within which our metaphor creation happens. So understanding and experiencing one kind of thing in terms of another, that's the essence of metaphor. Now, why do I suggest metaphors to make deep games? Because the human experience, what we feel and think, lives in the realm of abstract concepts. That means it cannot be derived from physical experience. You cannot touch sadness. You cannot externalize it and look at it and understand what it is. You can only feel into it, and then you have to get really creative in expressing what that's like. Same with joy, same with ambition, same with loyalty, same with trust, enthusiasm, courage. All of these things that we take for granted and that we think we know what they mean, they're entirely abstract. They have concrete manifestations. We can see the consequences of loyalty or disloyalty. We can see indexical signs that point towards sadness or joy. But the thing itself, we cannot smell, we cannot touch, we cannot see. And so it's really elusive, it's intangible, it's abstract, but it's also where it gets interesting. Yeah, an abstract concept is an experience or idea that cannot be immediately observed or derived directly from physical reality. Now, if the goal is to make games about the human experience, and if the human experience resides in the realm of complex abstract concepts, we need to model these complex abstract concepts and make them tangible to players through gameplay, if we want to make deep games. And what's the problem with modeling abstract concepts in games? Well, they are abstract. how do you model something that is abstract? So what are games about? What are games that are about something? We talked about this before. They are simulations, and simulations have a source system. In a simulation, you model salient aspects or behaviors of that source system. Abstract concepts have a really blurry source system. So since they are not directly derivable from an observable reality, we have to first do a lot of exploration and digging and analyzing to understand that source system first. That's why it's so hard to design them. That's really the key point in being able to make interesting and thought-provoking deep games, is all the labor that goes into understanding the abstract source system and making it less abstract and actually concrete through the use of a fitting metaphor. If you want to model some kind of ecosystem, there's always something you can observe directly, you can understand how it works. But with love, for example, you ask 10 people what that is, and you get 15 different answers, depending on when you ask them. So same thing with all the abstract concepts. Source systems are not observable. We have to understand them first. That's what I mean by nailing pudding to the wall. You first have to grasp the pudding. It's very elusive. Sometimes this part of it stands out, then the other. Things shift around. It's, yeah, very puddingy. So how to identify the source system of an abstract concept so it can be translated into rules and mechanics? Again, metaphor, the definition. We understand it through something else. Metaphors make abstract ideas concrete. Without it, we could not comprehend anything beyond our immediate, directly experienceable physical bodies and surroundings. Without metaphors, we could not have a single interesting conversation about anything that goes beyond where we stand and what we see and perceive immediately. Our language is beset with metaphors. That in itself is a metaphor. When we exchange ideas, we treat ideas as objects that we can bargain with, that we can trade. It's so omnipresent. It's not something that's just reserved for poets. It's not a highbrow thing at all. It is how our entire conceptual system operates. So people use analogies and metaphors from familiar concrete domains to discuss less familiar or abstract domains. For example, flowing water for electricity. It's really, we cannot see electricity directly. We can see the sparks fly, but it's hard to imagine how electricity makes its way through a house. But if we think about it like flowing water, it becomes a much more understandable, comprehensible, tangible concept. Or we think about a long journey for marriage. Extended metaphors can evoke a whole system of knowledge. It's when the computer metaphor, with its notions of encoding, storage, and retrieval, is applied to cognition. Like when computer science became a discipline, cognitive science made a big leap forward because suddenly they had metaphors to draw on, which is weird, but this is how we operate. We have something concrete that we suddenly can understand better to make sense of something that has thus far been really opaque and elusive and fuzzy to us. I like to bring this example because it's so simple and we all have metaphors that we can ascribe to this. And you can exercise this you can try this out for yourself. So imagine finishing the sentence, life is, and then insert the experience that you have about life right now, or you had at some point. Life is. And then don't say like, because then you stop making a metaphor, you're making a simile. Popular responses that come up to this. Life is a roller coaster ride. Life is a highway. Life is a box of chocolates. Life is a mess. Life is a game. lots and lots of images that come. It really depends on what aspect of life, what quality of life is most salient to you at the moment, what metaphor pops up for you. So if you did this exercise right now and spontaneously landed on something, I'd be very curious what it is. But there is probably a connection to how you feel about life right now. What stands out? What is highlighted in your conscience about life right now? We understand and structure our experience in terms of these image schemata, patterns that emerge from experience and that we recognize when we encounter them again. That's our way, the brain's way of making shortcuts in our experience. We don't have to reinvent it again and again and again and again. We don't have to reinterpret again and again and again what something feels like. We grok it together, condense it together into one of these image schemata or an experiential gestalt. We know, for example, exactly at some point what it feels like to anticipate something pleasant or unpleasant. There is this build up towards a concrete event. There is a passage of time that happens until this event, and then it happens, and then there is a release of energy. That's an experiential gestalt. It's a pattern that we're familiar with. Or build up of any kind of force and release. Now, of course, this is the only example I can think about. But it works for many, many different kinds of experiences that they share common experiential gestalts. And that's how we can make these metaphorical connections. The gestalt of a journey, of going somewhere and exploring and taking our time and maybe hitting a roadblock and maybe having to find a detour and maybe getting lost on the way, is a journey that is an experiential gestalt that can map really well on certain experiences of life. And the roller coaster is this high intensity but shorter period where it goes up and down and you have a lack of agency, and it can be thrilling, but you also don't really are in control, can be another gestalt that is right now highlighted in your consciousness, because that's how you're experiencing life at the moment. And that's why it maps onto life as a metaphor quite neatly. So we can understand life, for example, in terms of a highway, because it shares salient dimensions with the experiential gestalt of highway. By dimensions, I mean this. And this is also from Johnson and Lakoff's book, Metaphors We Live By. And the text, actually, the chapter this is from, or this mostly refers to, is on Student Portalen for you, so you can read the original as well. So these dimensions include participants, different parts of the experience, different stages of the experience. There is a linear sequence somehow, and a purpose. And experiential gestalts are anchored or come from our physically being in the world as humans. They're anchored in our physical bodily presence in the world. We are participants in our experience. We cannot experience anything without in some way being part of it. We have parts, like body parts. There are stages to movement. There is always a fluidity between your arm going from here to here. There's a plant here. It's not that it starts here and then suddenly it's here, and then at some point it's in the middle. It goes from here to here. So these stages in linear sequence are tightly coupled as a conceptual thing, how we structure and understand experiences in general, as a holistic thing. If you're missing bits and pieces, you're experiencing a fugue state. You see a doctor. So our experiences are more holistic in that sense. And there is some kind of purpose, some kind of goal in an experience, even if it's just to linger in the moment, that can be part of the purpose of an experience, or to get something over with, or to live towards a moment, or yeah, all sorts of things can be that purpose. And that also sets experience apart from stuff that just happens to us. So experience means raising whatever happens to us to a certain level of consciousness, that we are aware that this is happening, that we are paying attention to it, we are present in the moment, and we can then refer back to it and retell it. You don't just retell random stuff that happened to you. You only retell things that have reached a level where it has become an experience. So let's go back to this example of life as a highway and how mapping different multi-dimensional elements between the source and the target, life and highway, actually can work. So the multidimensional gestalt of this life highway metaphor would be participants, so me, for example, as the driver, and fellow other drivers who are on the highway with me, fellow travelers. The parts, there's a life path, which would be the road that I'm on. There are different decisions that I make in my life, which can be represented by the exits that you find on a highway. You can make wrong decisions, then you might need to make a detour, or it just takes you longer. Yeah, that's a detour. You can have a nervous breakdown or an accident or something which would land you in an emergency lane. So that's the equivalent, potential equivalent. Partying or not taking good care of yourself, driving yourself too hard, even overworking, whatever it is, could be interpreted as speeding. So you're bulleting towards your final destination. A personal disaster could be understood as an accident. And yeah, when you've reached the end of the road, the end of your travel, the final destination, that would be death. The different stages of this, you don't start with death. You probably start somewhere in the beginning, and you might not drive so well in the beginning because you're just learning how to do this. Everything might seem to go really fast, or you're a little insecure of how to change lanes and whatnot. So you have to learn a lot of skills in the beginning. You might also be kind of cocky because you're young and reckless. So depending on what stands out to you, this can take different directions and different interpretations. Later on, you might have less focus, but you also may be a little bit more experienced and know how to pace yourself, hopefully. And then in linear sequence, the stages have some kind of an order, but it also, how this life as a highway metaphor plays out specifically really depends on your experience. What's your interpretation of life as a highway? And if you were all to sketch this out and possibly even design a game, where a driving game, where you have a highway and you modeled it on your life, what would map the initial part onto? What kind of childhood or young adulthood would it map onto? And what are the incidents that happen, and how would you represent them? Would be very, very different for everybody, probably, and really interesting and unique. I would love to see that, actually. But there will be an order to it that you give it. It's like your chronology of your growing up and maturing and learning and getting the hang of driving this life as a highway. Or maybe not. That's also part of it. Sometimes it can be really difficult to navigate. And the purpose is a good question. It's also up to you to answer, and you might not have an answer at all at this point. But the cynical view of this would be the purpose is to get to the end, but let's not be too hasty. Yeah, this is just a further illustration of where you can take this metaphor. Okay, so the way this works, here's a little, hopefully somehow helpful graphic. Life is this abstract thing, this smoky, elusive thing here, and it has certain salient characteristics, certain salient dimensions. This is the filing cabinet. But you cannot really go there directly. You need something that helps you translate it. Because the elusive thing cannot be filed properly. You have to first pin it down into its distinct elements and make them concrete conceptually in your mind to understand what you're dealing with. So while this is there on an intuitive kind of abstract, I feel it sort of level, this connection between fuzzy life idea and concrete structural elements of it, you use the metaphor that pops to mind to ground it in something concrete. And then your experience and the metaphor you have, they meet in the filing cabinet. They meet in the different structural dimensions. If the metaphor is powerful for you, if it's resonant and evocative, there is a good mapping between what your life feels like and the metaphor you come up with. If you still don't know, you will have to go back and forth between different images probably to find one that truly resonates and fits. So you go from abstract to concrete. But you also then can go from concrete to abstract. So this making a deep game and the work that goes into finding a strong metaphor is not a linear process where you first have an elusive experience and then you ground it in a metaphor and then you're done. It's by looking at the metaphor and also unpacking that whole knowledge system that comes with a metaphorical, with a structural metaphor, a richer metaphorical domain, that you can shed more light on your original experience. So if I think about life as a cave exploration, I have no idea why this came to mind right now. I can trust this image as it just popped into my mind, because there is some kind of wisdom to our unconscious to feed us images that are somehow relevant and rich. And then do some more digging on cave explorations, what goes into it, and find all the different parts of that, maybe squeezing through a tunnel, not being able to breathe. That sounds really drastic. Or then suddenly an underground lake opening up in a cavern and all the stalactites and stalagmites and whatever, and being in this really beautiful, magical, protected space and environment. So by unpacking all the potential things I can find in the metaphor and fleshing the metaphor out, I can gain a richer understanding about the original experience that I was trying to grasp through the metaphor. And it might point my awareness towards, oh, so that part might be there as well. And working with metaphorical imagery and seeing them in their richness can really also change how we think about things and how we experience them. So if at first the focus was on cave, oppressive, dark, no way out, it can open up to beautiful scenery, magical incubation of ideas. New things can come from retreat if you stick with it, if you stick with the metaphor and dig a little deeper there. So going back and forth between the two, I find very helpful in terms of self-exploration and then also in terms of fleshing out a concept for a game. So yeah, metaphors help to nail the pudding of abstract concepts to the wall. This is a nailed down pudding. I did some Google image searching. This is what I found. What I wanted to do as homework, I want you to play a few metaphorical games. They're quite short. Some of them you might have already experienced. So this is a game called Loneliness. And there is also, and it's abstract on the fictional level, but its rules are not. So I would like you to play it and reflect on your experience of it. And also question in how far it is metaphorical and where the metaphor might break down. And then I want you to watch these extra credits episodes, Mechanics as Metaphors, to support this further. So the links are already on Student Portalen. And then there are a few further games I want you to analyze. So loneliness is the one that is actually discussed in extra credits. That's why I want you to play that first. Lim, there is only a video. I could only find a video of the game. I mentioned it briefly before. I couldn't find the actual game anymore to play it, but the video gives you some idea of how it works. I want you to play Acrasia. That's the substance abuse game that was actually my first metaphorical game. And then this is a really beautiful piece, High Delivery, on the Feri Halim original website. I'm curious what you say to that. And then Thomas Was Alone, which might be the most well-known of all of these. And they're all metaphorical to different degrees. So have a look at them. And just to put this on your radar as well, assignment 3 is coming up. It's due October 1st. And it's a metaphorical game prototype and write-up. So please see the assignment description for details. And then if you have any questions, we can talk about it. And I will schedule team check-ins with you for September 24th to see how things are going. And there will be no class on September 28th because I'm in this academic teacher training that will take so much time. Okay, I'm really excited. I hope you have fun with metaphors. And yeah, talk to you soon.